talk about navigating an organization through transformation. And I think as many of us in this room are leaders, aspiring leaders in the media and technology industries, we're faced every day with the fact that the level of disruption is very high and change is constant. And we have an amazing panel of change agents on this stage that have all led transformation initiatives for some of the biggest companies and brands in the world. And not only have they done that, but they've also managed to navigate change in their own personal career in some pretty amazing ways. So I'm going to first introduce our panel. First, we have Peggy Johnson. Peggy is the Executive Vice President from Microsoft. I'm so sorry. From Microsoft, and she runs business development. And in her role, she's responsible for strategic partnerships and really driving the growth trajectory for Microsoft. And prior to that, Peggy led various leadership roles at Qualcomm, which, for those of you that are familiar with Qualcomm as a semiconductor and telecommunications leader, it had a fascinating transformation journey from a company of 30 employees to 300, and Peggy was part of that. But an interesting fun fact about Peggy is that she's also has 14 brothers and sisters.
Yes, I do. A very small house.
Okay, and our panelists on the end, I'm going to go to Lisa Ryan Howard. So Lisa is the SVP of advertising for the New York Times. She is responsible to run revenue generation and advertising revenues across multi-platforms of products, in consumer products and education and fashion and accessories. It's a pretty exciting role. And she's also had a pretty interesting ride at several major companies such as Yahoo and WebMD and Billboard magazine and others. And Peggy's fun fact, because you always have one show off on every panel, is that she made the Olympic swimming trials in 1988. So that's pretty impressive from my perspective. And last but not least, Deborah Fine, who is our resident CEO, board member on our panel, who has led a pretty diverse career of leading 6 major lifestyle brands to incredible heights of profit and growth, including iVillage, Model, Glamour magazine, and Victoria's Secret Pink. So pretty amazing career path. So let's start the panel off. I'm going to start it off with you, Debbie. When we think about change, a lot of it is, as we just saw the presentation prior, which is really around having this mental model of change, right? Your own personal perspective on how that's so important. And I think you've touched upon the fact that there are key different ways of looking at transformation and change in an organization, and you kind of categorize them. Can you share them with the group?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say, in the spirit of walking the walk and talking the talk, Lisa just said to me, I don't have a microphone, and I said, I'll share mine, but I was going to say only if she'll give me her shoes. in the spirit of women and change and transformation. So what size are you?
Very big feet. That's what I'm going to say. But the advantage of that is, thank you.
Now she has the microphone.
The advantage of that is that I get, when I was in fashion at Condé Nast, everybody sent me to the shoe closet because I was the only person under 6 feet who could wear all the model shoes. So I got all the free shoes at my office.
I didn't fit in those, so I'll get back to transformation. Anyway, yeah, I think, I was thinking a lot. We did prep calls, as you might imagine, and I here a little bit early, so I was gathering my thoughts downstairs at Pret, and we were saying in the wings earlier that you don't often take the time to think about how you transform and how that might be meaningful to others. You just kind of do it. So I hope what I share and the rest of us is of value to all of you in some way. And I think first and foremost, my own personal definition about transformation is precisely that, which is to give it a definition. And for me, because I've been a change agent of sorts throughout my entire career, it's kind of been about not necessarily being comfortable, not comfortable at all between us, with the status quo. I am someone who believes there's always bigger, better, more, there's a higher bar, and I love to take myself and the team and anyone that wants to come with me and hurl myself over it. So I would say job one in transformation for me has been to define it. Like I said, that's my own personal definition about not always being comfortable with the status quo and enjoying change. I would say secondly is understanding where you are in the enterprise life cycle and how to calibrate that. And the three levels for me that Michele just referenced are as follows, largely because they're the three levels I've experienced. The first being, are you really just trying to maximize your core business? You know, the daily donuts and the daily grind and what you do every day, but you know there's bigger and better ways to do that. And so that's kind of level one, and it has been for me. Level two is more about leveraging the existing assets and capabilities and leveraging the existing infrastructure to use that stability and add something new. And then the third level that I've had the chance to experience is more about disruption. And it's more so disruption if you're in a startup than if you're inside a large corporation. But the third level is really recreating the core. And I would sum that up by saying the sooner you kind of come to terms with taking the F word out of transformation, and that would be fear, not the real F word, and defining it for yourself. One. Number two, understanding where you are in the enterprise life cycle with those three phases. And then thirdly, once you've done that, you're really able, or I have been able, I should say, with my teams to calibrate the people, the pace, and the process that you need to really get the job done. So that's the framework that I've operated in 6 times in 5 companies. So.
Amazing. Any other ladies, any other comments to add there?
I think I would just add, I would echo what Lisa said, is do what you love. Because in my career, I started as an engineer, and I loved being an engineer. I still love it. I still like to code. But I would go out on trips with some of the business folks to explain the product, and I realized I loved that. I loved being in front of the customer, but I was never going to change because I was an engineer. I thought I can't do that. And if you can follow those little signs that, you know what, I'm actually really passionate about doing that. That lights me up. Follow those things, and you'll find that good things will follow as well. And you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable as well. It's one of the things that Debbie just said, because in order for me to make that leap, I had to set aside, you know, what I was identifying myself as an engineer, and I made the leap over to the business side and really never looked back. I mean, engineering is still at my core, but that's what got me over there. And I knew it was going to be a little bit uncomfortable, and it was, but I love it, and I'm still there today.
I would add that I've had quite a lot of change in my career over the last 24 years, and I learned a couple things that might be valuable for you guys to know. One is that I didn't ever want to change, and most people don't want to change until it's almost thrust upon you, forced upon you. It's a very uncomfortable thing. So get comfortable with it, because I think now more than ever, we really live in a world of constant change. We decided in our organization that we were going to stop calling things reorgs, because we're always changing. So that's become the norm. So that word doesn't exist anymore. And then the second thing that I would say is that the big secret that nobody really tells you when you actually sit in a room at the top and you start to hear all of the leaders, whether it's the chief executive or the board or whoever it is, nobody really has a plan and has all the answers. We all pretend like we do, but nobody does. We're trying things. And so I would say, as we all navigate through these things, know that you have a right to be at the table too, and that we should all understand that there isn't a magic secret right answer, that we're trying things, especially these days in our business.
So change can be really exciting. When I was driving to work yesterday, I actually heard on the radio that Microsoft announced that they are planning to cure cancer within 10 years, and they will treat it like a computer virus. And Peggy, I think you've had some amazing experiences at Microsoft where you've been there through a lot of change, whether that was in the industry and at the company level. So how do you get everyone internally excited about change, especially, taking on something new?
Yeah, so I made a big change myself when I left Qualcomm after 25 years and moved to Microsoft 2 years ago. And so there, I had a big personal change to do that, and I definitely got uncomfortable in that. But I joined the company because it was going through change. It was, it's a 40-year-old company. It had been just so successful in all those years, but it was at this inflection point where its very business model was getting disrupted. They used to sell software in a transactional mode. It was going more to subscription. They had a new CEO, and he was all about change. We talk about this growth mindset where you have a culture of not a culture of knowing, but a culture of learning, of asking questions and learning. This is very different than the old Microsoft. And this is exactly this time I decided to choose to join the company because I was attracted by that change. But it goes to, I think, what you were just saying, change is constant. And if you're not comfortable in that environment, and if Microsoft wasn't comfortable in that environment changing, we might have started coming down the other side. But it's so exciting to be on the campus. It's like a new company with a new leader, and we're at an inflection point, and we're headed up, and it just feels very good. So change can be disruptive, but if you embrace it, it can be a very good thing. It can be a driving force.
So for many women in this room, they could be embarking on leading a new initiative, a new change initiative, and it could be for the first time. And Deb, you've led some pretty amazing transformation initiatives. I love that you talk about this formula for success. You talked about it when you opened up. But almost this culture of betterment is something that you've talked about. Can you share your perspectives with the group?
Sure. I would say of all of the businesses I've had the chance to lead and drive change within, the most extraordinary opportunity was at Avon. I had the chance many years ago when I was leaving Condé Nast to meet Andrea informationally, and there was no job. I was headed off to run one of two other really interesting media entities, and I'm always very thoughtful about the path of introduction, and I quite purposely chose to meet her, not through someone in the fashion, beauty, and retail world, but someone in the financial industry. And in about 45 minutes into our conversation, where much to the surprise of anyone who knows me, I didn't say a word, I looked at Andrea and I said, literally, I need to take a flyer. And she said, sure, ask me anything you want. And I said, I don't care. This is an unexaggerated truth. I said, I don't care if I have to sweep the floors here. I need to work with you. And Tierney Remick, my colleague over there from Korn Ferry, knows this story is true. So fast forward, I walked into Avon, and to Lisa's point, to me, the most incredible thing is that you couldn't Google the reinvention of Avon. This was 2001. This was pre-Birchbox, pre-Beauty Counter, pre-social media, pre everything. And Avon obviously was a very, very heavily cultured company. It's its own customer, it's its own data, it's its own channel. It was, to its credit, filled with a lot of men and also a lot of very well-tenured men and well-tenured women. So talk about walking into the fire. We were talking in the wings before. We said, there are those of us who see the C word, change, and run out of the building. People like us think, oh, that's great. We're just going to go right in. And sometimes you end up getting burned. But in this case, but fortunately, we've done okay. So, in the spirit of how you navigate that change and getting to this culture of betterment, as the talk unfolds, you'll kind of learn I love lists because I think it's an easy way to communicate a whole bunch of stuff and synthesize it. And so I would say to you that navigating change, regardless, again, of where you are in that kind of three-part enterprise life cycle, kind of change light all the way up through disruption, for me, the kind of 5 guidelines that I learned, because I hadn't really been in a change environment before, 20 years at Condé Nast, I was operating existing businesses. And so there are 5 kind of rules of the road that I learned that had helped me, not just at Avon, but in the subsequent roles that I held, and they were as follows. So number 1 was the underpinning, which was really being comfortable either helping to create or helping to forge a culture of betterment, which kind of goes to that point that I made earlier about not necessarily being comfortable with the status quo, and doing that in a way that lets you, at the risk of over-communicating, ensuring that you do over-communicate. Because I think the toughest thing about change is that people feel they're afraid of it, and they feel that information is power, and if they're not in the know, there's something going on that might be dilutive or detrimental to their life, and change it without their control. So the underpinning, if you will, of these 5 tenets is really about a culture of change, a culture of betterment and communication. The reason that's so important because the tenet at the top to me has always been about maintaining a delicate balance. And that really comes from the fact that you're walking into an organization, there are existing businesses, existing people, lots of legacy knowledge, and you need to really, really be mindful of respecting that delicate balance. And then there are three pillars that kind of run across in the middle, supported by communication and respecting the delicate balance. And they're pretty polar in terms of the spectrum. On the one end, you've got to respect the core business that you walked into, right? That's the business that's making the donuts and paying the rent. And probably if you're driving number 3, which is something new, it's probably paying your rent and your department's rent and funding your initiative. And all the way over on the other side, you need to be mindful of being able to reward the people who are driving that initiative, knowing that they're not making the donuts and paying the rent. And then the very important currency, or the fifth tenet in between, is the one that says you need to give permission to fail. And I think that's probably the toughest part inherent in change, because everyone's so afraid of it to begin with that if you add a modicum of failure into it, everybody thinks, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. So what I would say to you about those 5 dynamics is, number one, I wasn't born knowing them. I had to learn them and kind of hone them and fine tune them for myself. And number two, they're not always existing in that same kind of very neat box of currency 1, currency 2, and currencies 3 through 5, because to Lisa's point, change is constant. It's never stagnant. And for me, being mindful of those 5 pillars and tenets, not only in terms of navigating myself, but being conscious of what others were feeling, I think in no small way helped our teams successfully drive that change.
So Lisa, can you speak to that at Yahoo? I mean, you've talked about running very cross-functional transformation initiatives at Yahoo.
Yes, Yahoo is quite interesting, actually, and it was a huge challenge, particularly because it's such a large organization. It's not as big as Katrina's GE at 330,000 employees, but it was at the time about 14,000 employees when I was there. And I ran the lifestyle products there on the business and product side. So my job was to communicate the strategy to whether it was the sales organization or whether it was the marketing organization or whether it was clients of Yahoo. And they were at the time going through a massive amount of change, much as they are now. And there were all these cross-functional divisions. And the communication at the time I was there was the biggest challenge in my job, because there was a lot of turnover and there was a lot of reorganization within the company. And so we found that as soon as we would educate one group, the structure would change and we would have to educate a whole new team of people. And so I would say one thing that's really important is be thoughtful about the change. And when you do and when you are leading an organization through change, recognize that probably the single most important thing that you can do, and you talked a little bit to this, Debbie, is make sure that you are over communicating, make sure that you are really sharing the strategy behind why the change is happening, because it helps people not only feel more comfortable, but as they go out and evangelize the change as it relates to their specific job function, they actually can articulate to the other people they're talking to why we're doing this. And that why makes everybody else a little more comfortable with it. And I loved actually what Katrina said when she spoke about taking care of each other. That's something that at the New York Times, obviously our industry is going through huge change, and I love what we're doing around innovation. And we've launched a podcast division, we've launched virtual reality, we acquired an experiential design company a couple of weeks ago, and through all of this change, we're trying to educate the teams, and it's moving so quickly. But the thing that I love the most about it is that from the top, all the way filtered down through the organization, we are very conscious of taking care of each other through this, because some people that we're educating and teaching through this have been there 25 years. Some people have been there 6 months. Some people are brand new, and everybody deserves to understand the why, and everybody deserves to be treated with respect. And I think that communication and that respect is something that we've really, really had success with at the New York Times specifically.
So we touched on the notion of failure. I recently attended an event where a speaker got up and she said, I always love coming to these events because everybody talks about these super successful case studies and success stories. And one of these days, that's going to be me. And so on the topic of failure, do we feel we talk about failure, but do you feel that we give it a little bit of lip service, or do you feel that failure is really okay? And do you have demonstrable examples of how you've really failed in your career and kind of what you learned from that? Peggy?
I like to call it learnings instead of failures, but yeah, I have a pretty big one. When I was back at Qualcomm, we were cell phone, we made the chips that go in most of the smartphones, and we had this idea one day about sending video to handsets. Now, of course, everybody has video on their handsets now, but back then it was very hard. The pipes, if you will, to the handsets were much smaller, and that wasn't a common thing. So we had this great idea to buy spectrum separate from the cellular spectrum and send in video, basically broadcast TV to the handsets. We built the whole thing out. It worked great. Technically, it worked great. But we really stumbled in a bunch of areas. We didn't have the right, weren't really buyers of content. We didn't know what we were doing. So when we would go to buy the content, they saw us coming, and we would definitely get the highest rates, and the coverage wasn't very good. We thought people were going to look at it outside, but they were looking at it in their living rooms with a big TV up here. So it was one of the first examples of multi-screen viewing. And then the cost was left up to the operators, and they had a real high price on it. And so eventually we had to shut it down. But when we went back and did a postmortem, we learned that every step of the way, the next time we stepped into the media world, we knew what we were doing. The next time we tried to put extra parts into the phone, we knew what we were doing. And at the end of the day, we even had another use for all that spectrum that was sitting there. We ended up figuring out how to bond it to existing cell phone spectrum and make an even fatter pipe, and we ended up selling the spectrum to AT&T for $2 billion. So it all worked out great, actually, at the end of the day. But for a while, we were just super upset about it. We thought it worked, yet it didn't work. And it wasn't until you sit back and say, what can I take away from this, that you really feel like you can go out and do something and risk failure and know that if you do fail, you'll still have something to take away from it. Because if you never put out any sort of risk, your company's never going to grow, you'll never innovate, you'll never grow in your career if you don't risk things. Sometimes you might change jobs and it doesn't work for you. That's okay. Learn from it and move on. So I think we do talk a lot about, failure as, yeah, sure, it's okay to do, but what you really want to do is learn from it and take something away from it, and don't sort of, get lost in the vagaries of what went wrong, but pick up and keep going forward. And I feel like throughout my career, every time that I did that, it helped me build something else in the future going forward. So think of it as additive over time.
I have one failure story.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go personal for a second. This is not about a product that I've worked on, but since you mentioned, I didn't know that before today that you were going to mention swimming. My plan, I had a grand plan. I was a planner, and my grand plan was to make the Olympic team. And I moved away from my home at 15, and I even planned my college that I was going to go to, because I thought, well, I'll win the gold medal and then I'll be a sports announcer. And so I picked a college that was good at broadcast journalism. And I did not make the team. And I thought, my life is over. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. The only thing you can do, you can't swim socially like you can play tennis or golf. Like, what am I going to do? And I yeah, and I went back to school, and it was hard. I had an adjustment period, but I spent a long time trying to figure out, like, what do I want to be now? And I stumbled into, because I was already in the journalism school at the college I was going to, I stumbled into an advertising class, and it led me to my career. And I feel so fortunate, because broadcast journalists, when you start out, make like $17,000 a year. So I knew I wasn't going to make much money. And for me, it was about finding something that you love. And I actually found a career in advertising and publishing and media where you can both, make a living and you can love what you do. So I feel like you can't plan everything in your life. And so when you have things like, happen to you that you don't plan, just kind of go with it a little bit, and things do work out.
So in some closing remarks, I think through this notion of change in all of your careers, is there something that was surprising and or a huge lesson learned through all of your experiences that you'd want to share with the group, Peggy?
I think I'm surprised that I left San Diego for Seattle, and it all worked out well. I'm okay with the rain. I never thought I was born and raised in LA and San Diego, and I think that was all about pushing me outside my comfort zone. So, taking the leap.
I would say the thing I'm most surprised about is how comfortable you really get with change. And the first time you take the leap off the high dive into the shallow end, which for me was after leaving Condé Nast, where I started as a college intern and ultimately had the chance to lead both Brides and Glamour, and I was there for 10 years twice. I never in a million years, to your point about you never know, never thought I'd end up inside of a direct selling company, and it turned out to be the most important, most pivotal experience of my entire career. And I guess I would say I'm surprised that the learnings I've picked up along the way, knock on wood so far, have worked. So whether that's kind of coming to a personal definition of what change means for you, identifying the level of change in the organization and the fortitude, the intestinal fortitude to drive it forward, depending on where you are. And probably the most important thing I learned is that I call it kind of the 3 A's, which is my mantra for talent. But, none of us do any of this alone. The 4 of us on this stage and all of you in the audience, none of us have led what we've led or run what we've run or achieved what we've achieved by ourselves. And I think the people piece that so many of us have talked about is really important. And for me, the consistency of my own rule of thumb and how well that's worked has probably been the best reward and the best surprise. And my kind of corny little ism, if you will, about talent, I've called the 3 A's as part of my own guiding principles for a long time. And it's number 1, hire adults, which is kind of code for the know what rule. And you're really looking to hire people who are adult in terms of how they operate and the trust that they can imbue. And there are people oftentimes who know more about a specific discipline than you know. So being able to have that self-awareness is really key. The second piece is to be self-aware enough to give them the autonomy to go off and execute the change that you and your team have been challenged with. And the third is to, in exchange for that autonomy, is to really expect the kind of accountability that a grown-up would give you. And I guess I'm continually surprised that rules and lists that seem as basic and fundamental as the ones I've shared with you guys, for better or worse, have really worked. So hopefully there'll be a 7th one, and that'll be the charm.
I'll go quickly because I know we're out of time. Mine is very simple: balance, schmalance. Just like Wenda said, like forgive yourself. Just don't try to do everything. Like I'm lucky enough to have a family and healthy kids, and really feel like in a successful career, and feel like just go with it. Don't worry so much about trying to make it all perfect.
Well, speaking of family and kids, we did find an interesting fun fact that all 3 ladies on the stage all have a son named Jack.
Jake.
We were quick.
That's right. It wasn't
Just
Jacob.
Jake.
It's Jack. Okay. And I want to thank all our ladies on the panel for today for really making this a really great session. Thank you.